A 9-year-old boy was captured in a Massachusetts swamp and sold into slavery for £1. His name was never written down. His crime was being born the grandson of the man who had made peace on this rock. How does a peace agreement become a death sentence in a single generation on the same ground? To understand how we got here, go back 27 years. Go back to the rock. March 23rd, 1649. A granite outcropping above the Satucket River in what is now East Bridgewater, Massachusetts. Two groups of men sit across from each other. One of them is Ousamequin, the man the English called Massasoit, Great Sachem of the Wampanoag Confederacy, approximately 69 years old, who had kept the peace with Plymouth colony for nearly 30 years and fed them when they were starving. The man across from him is Miles Standish, Plymouth colony's military captain, the most feared soldier in southeastern Massachusetts. What changes hands that day is in the deed. 7 coats, 9 hatchets, 8 hoes, 20 knives, 4 moose skins, and 10.5 yards of cotton. What Ousamequin gives in return: 14 square miles of Wampanoag homeland, every acre of what is now the 3 Bridgewaters, Brockton, parts of Abington, and Hanson. East Bridgewater calls this its founding moment. There is a plaque on the rock. The plaque says, "None of what you are about to hear." Here is what we know. The deed exists. The payment is documented. The transfer is in Plymouth colony's own records. Here is what we cannot know, because no Wampanoag voice survives in the written record of that day, whether Ousamequin understood the transaction the same way Miles Standish did. Every pattern of Wampanoag land relationships suggests he did not. To Ousamequin, land was not property in the English legal sense, not something you owned permanently, exclusively, in a way that could be signed away forever. What he almost certainly believed he was conveying was shared use, the right to farm and settle alongside the Wampanoag, not in place of them. Plymouth colony had a different understanding. In English law, what the deed conveyed was fee simple title, permanent, exclusive, alienable ownership, no joint use, no Wampanoag hunting rights. 2 legal worlds, 1 piece of paper, and only one side with courts, constables, and muskets to enforce its interpretation. There is one more detail the deed doesn't explain. Plymouth colony's own authorization extended 4 miles in every direction from the Satucket Weir. The actual deed extends 7 miles in every direction. 3 extra miles in every direction, with no record of why and no explanation that has ever surfaced. Someone knew exactly what was being taken. When Wampanoag people continued to hunt and move through the land after the deed was signed, Plymouth colony's response was not negotiation, it was arrest. Ousamequin protested. His words survive in the record. "What is this you call property? The land is our mother, nourishing all her children." Plymouth colony's enforcement machinery had no mechanism for considering this objection. The man who had saved Plymouth from starvation was now being told that his people were trespassers on land his family had used for generations. He had no standing in their courts. He had no appeal. Ousamequin died around 1661. Before he died, he brought his 2 sons, Wampanoag and Metacom, to a pilgrim neighbor's home and publicly begged them to keep the peace. What the deed at Sachem Rock had set in motion, he could not stop. His sons would inherit everything he had built, and everything the deed had cost. Wampanoag was the elder son. When his father died, he became Sachem. Within a year, Plymouth colony summoned him. The charge was vague: rumors of unauthorized land sales, possible alliances with rival tribes. No formal accusation, no trial date. Major Josias Winslow seized Wampanoag at Gunpoint in Halifax and brought him to Plymouth colony. He was held for 3 days. Then, freed, apparently, he fell ill on the road home. He died before he reached his people. The cause of death was never established. A colonial doctor had given him something described as a working physic during the interrogation. Wampanoag's brother Metacom believed he had been poisoned. Plymouth colony offered no accounting. What we know is that a sachem walked into colonial custody and did not walk out. and the institution holding him saw no need to explain why. Metacom was now sachem. He had inherited a dispossession. He had inherited a death. Here is the detail that changes everything you have heard so far. In 1686, 10 years after King Philip's War ended, 10 years after his family was sold and his head was put on a pole, the English of Bridgewater bought the land again, the same land, from a different Wampanoag leader, Josiah Wampatuck. Some individual parcels would be purchased a third time by private settlers, because the first deed wasn't enough, and they knew it. The institution that had arrested Wampanoag hunters, held Wamsutta without charge, and gone to war had privately doubted the legal foundation the entire time. You do not rebuy land you are confident you own. Go back and look at every act of enforcement, every arrest, every summons at gunpoint, every court proceeding that treated Ousamequin's objection as a non-event. The people doing the enforcing were not certain they were right. They were certain they had the power. That is a different thing entirely. For 13 years before the war, Metacom had watched Plymouth Colony tighten its grip on Wampanoag land and sovereignty. Then, in 1675, 3 of his own counselors were hanged by Plymouth Colony for the murder of a Christianized native informant. Metacom had not ordered it. The trial was conducted without meaningful Wampanoag participation. 3 men died on the Plymouth gallows. That was the wire that tripped. King Philip's War began in June 1675, and within months, the war came home to the Bridgewater territory, the exact land transferred at Sachem Rock 26 years before. The geography of the deed became the geography of the war. July 20th, 1676, Benjamin Church leads a company of colonial soldiers on an attack on Metacom's camp near Bridgewater, near the same ground the deed had transferred, near the same river where the transaction had taken place. Metacom escapes into the swamp. His wife, Utona does not. His 9-year-old son does not. They are brought before the colonial leadership. The debate: execute them or sell them. The colonial ministers who weighed in knew who the boy was. They knew whose grandson he was. They knew what rock his family had stood on 27 years before. They sold him anyway, into slavery, for £1 apiece. West Indies or Bermuda? The records conflict, and we still don't know which. His name is not in those records. It was never written down. Metacom was killed on August 12, 1676, shot in a swamp near Mount Hope in Rhode Island. He was 38 years old. His body was quartered. His head was put on a pole in Plymouth, where it stayed for 25 years. Benjamin Church captured Metacom's war chief, Anawan, shortly after. Anawan surrendered peacefully and presented Church with Metacom's wampum belts, the royal regalia of Massasoit's dynasty, the beadwork inheritance of the man who had signed the deed at Sachem Rock. Church later said he pleaded for Anawan's life. Governor Josiah Winslow, son of the same Josias Winslow who had seized Wamsutta at gunpoint, overruled him. Anawan was executed. Trespassers, who had married Massasoit's daughter, was executed. Within 1 generation of the Sachem Rock deed, 1 son dead in custody, 1 son beheaded in a swamp, a grandson sold nameless into the Atlantic slave trade, a son-in-law killed on a Plymouth scaffold. The dynasty that had fed Plymouth Colony in its first winter was gone. Massasoit's wampum belts are held today at Pilgrim Hall Museum in Plymouth. They are the only physical remnant of his dynasty that can still be seen. The Wampanoag are not gone. The Mashpee Wampanoag tribe is a federally recognized sovereign nation. The Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead, Aquina, is a federally recognized sovereign nation. They are here. They are the living successors of the people who sat at Sachem Rock in 1649 and understood the land as their mother. The Bridgewater Purchase is not a sealed historical chapter. It is the origin document of a dispossession that their communities have lived inside for nearly 4 centuries. Go back to the rock. The granite outcropping above the Satucket River in a public park in East Bridgewater, 40 minutes south of Boston. The plaque commemorates the 1649 deed as a founding moment. It does not mention the boy. It does not mention Wamsuta dying in custody. It does not mention the skull on the pole, or the wampum belt stripped from a surrendered war chief, or the name that was never written down. The colony kept meticulous records. The deed itself, the court proceedings, the minister's deliberations over what to do with a 9-year-old child. The silence on that stone is not an accident of history. It is a choice. Still being made. On a rock you can drive to this afternoon. The boy's name remains unknown. If this ground feels familiar, the same Plymouth colony, the same enforcement machinery, the same pattern of seizure without account, it should. This was not only East Bridgewater's story. Every town along the Taunton River basin carries a version of the same deed. We'll be on that road again.